in strength sports, let's say powerlifting, strongman, Olympic weightlifting, would even include CrossFit in that category. Being good in a gym and training hard and performing well is one thing. But really, if you are a competitor, the whole purpose of the training is to perform your best on competition day. Doesn't matter what you're lifting in the gym, it's what you lift on the platform that matters. So really, you can actually completely screw up 12 weeks of preparation by not peaking properly. So really, you should put a lot of attention when you're trying to peak for a competition. And the best way to peak will depend on your neurological profile. So we'll look at the type 1A personality first. Of course, if you don't know what I'm talking about, just go back to the earlier capsules where I explained the different neurotypes. Now, type 1A are one of the few of the three neurotypes that are the most likely to be attracted to competing in power sports or strength sports. They are what Dave Tate would call the strong powerlifters. You can also find a few of them in like shot putting circles, for example, and some Olympic weightlifters. So they are pretty common breed in training. Now, the worst thing to do when peaking for a type 1A is to take 2, 3, or 4 days off before a competition. These guys are driven by dopamine, and they have a very on or off personality. So when you force them to rest a few days before a competition, what happens is you put the switch on off. And it's going to be really hard for them to turn it back on when competing, because they're driven by dopamine, not adrenaline. Adrenaline will help them, but it might actually make them crash also in the second part of the competition. So they need to train closer to the competition. Now, the bad thing then is oftentimes we are a coach, and what you tell these athletes, if they don't have a problem making weight, for example, is, well, the 3 days before a competition, don't train and eat more to have more fuel and retain water, be stronger. It's a common practice in powerlifting. It's called bloating. Like if you have room before the limit of your weight class, then you eat a lot more, especially like sugar and salty foods, to retain water, retain glycogen, to have an advantage during the big movements. Now, what do these foods do? Well, think of, why do you have comfort food when you're feeling bad? It's because comfort food will increase serotonin, making you feel better. Type 1A, they are sensitive to dopamine, but they have a low dopamine level, and they already have high serotonin. And to be competitive, to be driven, to be on, to be in the zone, dopamine has to be, relatively speaking, higher than serotonin. So if they take days off, dopamine goes down, especially since they will force themselves not to do crazy stuff, not to get injured before a competition. So dopamine stays low, and then they eat sugar, carbs, salt, and serotonin goes up. So it becomes harder and harder for the dopamine to exceed, relatively speaking, serotonin. So it's hard to get in the zone when competing. They feel off. What they need to do is actually train very close to a competition. Like you look at Bulgarian lifters, which are type 1A, they will often train the morning of a competition to get that dopamine rush to be competitive. Of course, it's not training, but it's still training. So the way a type 1A should peak is, well, let's say you're competing on Saturday. They have one rest day, and it's on Thursday. The Thursday is used to rest and recover. And yes, they could have more food there. And they will train on Friday, so the day before a competition. Why? Because they don't want to be sluggish by resting right before a competition. So they will use that Friday workout to wake up the nervous system and get that dopamine increase. But the type of training you're doing should not fatigue them. So we're talking either like 80-ish%, 75, 80% on their competition lift, like bench press, squat, deadlift, or simply doing overcoming isometrics. Pressing against spins, that's the approach I like to use the most with type 1A. If I have a power lifter that's a type 1A, the Friday before a competition, 4 sets, 6 seconds, overcoming isometrics on bench press, 4 sets, 6 seconds, 90 degrees, squat, overcoming isometrics. 3 minutes rest between sets, plenty of rest. No adrenaline, because we don't want to crash dopamine. That's enough to put their brain in the zone, and they will go in a combination rested and turned on. And of course, the rest of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, would be more regular but non-maximal lifting, maybe working up to their openers on the big lifts. So that's how I would peak a 1A athlete, not resting for 3 days before a competition. That will kill them.